Of women composers. This evening has been over 3 years in the making, with the original idea proposed to our funding agencies back in January of 2019. So we were more than excited to be here now with you and with this great music. In addition to the music, we will lift up the accomplishments of groundbreaking women in several fields. To start our evening, we are thrilled to have Staci Catron with us tonight. She is the Cherokee Garden Library Director at the Atlanta History Center. In this role, she not only oversees the operation of the library, but also serves over 20,000 researchers per year. She directs the fundraising efforts, promotes the library, and works to preserve historic landscapes. You may have seen her books, Women in Atlanta and Seeking Eden, a collection of Georgia's historic gardens, at your local bookstore. She is the past president of the Southern Garden History Society and past chair of the Georgia National Register of Historic Places Review Board. As you might suspect, she is an avid gardener and plant geek, her words, not mine. But for us in Atlanta Freedom Bands, her most endearing quality is that she played flute in her high school orchestra and marching band. Yes. So let's welcome Staci Catron.
Thanks so much, Cliff. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening with everyone. And just a little background for those of you who don't know, who are in the Atlanta Freedom Bands, the Keenan Research Center where I work, we house your records. And so we take care of your history all the time. And if you've ever watched those programs on PBS where you see history detectives with the gray boxes and the white gloves, that's how I look normally, okay. And I was just speaking with Cliff, and with you all having your 30th anniversary coming up next year, he's going to bring over more records, and we're going to talk about, what we might want to digitize or have available as part of your 30th celebration. So that made me very happy to talk about that this evening. So as you know, we're all really into our own stuff, and I'm a landscape historian and a women's historian, and when I say I'm niche, I'm niche. So y'all, that's what we're doing tonight. So here we go. Women have been active in the fields of landscape architecture and design since its formation in 1899, and they've played major roles in its governance and membership, including renowned American landscape architect Beatrix Farrand, one of the 11 founding members of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Membership of women in this organization has grown from 15 women in 1899 to over 5,000 women today. Yet the fields of landscape architecture and design are still dominated by white men in the 21st century. Anybody shocked about that? Okay. So the American Society of Landscape Architects is striving to be representative of the communities they serve, yet the reality of a lack of diversity among the organization's membership is actually shocking. In 2022, at the beginning of the pandemic, in January of that year, only 4% of their members identified as Latino, and only 1% of ASLA members identified as African American. So they have a long way to go, as we do in many aspects of our society. So this evening, I'm going to highlight 4 women who were seminal in this field, but we're putting it in the broader context of history. So as I highlight the lives of these particular women, let's think about the world they lived in. Even though the 19th Amendment became federal law on August 26, 1920, Georgia women actually could not vote until 2 years later in 1922. Again, no one's shocked, right? This right was reserved for white women only in Georgia. And this is another thing you all know, but it's also a hard thing to remember, but we have to acknowledge it and uplift it because it's really important. It wasn't until 1965 that the Voting Rights Act directed the Attorney General to enforce the right to vote for all African Americans in the United States. So I really geek out on historic postcards, y'all. I personally own about 5,000. So if you have an old postcard and know where to put it, I'm your person. Anyway, The population of Georgia's oldest city, Savannah, as well as in Atlanta, grew steadily in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. And I believe this building, does anyone know the date of this church that it was built? So it looks 1920s, I think Cliff thinks it was built in late 20s. So in this time period, around 1930, Savannah had only 95,000 people. And Atlanta, by 1940, only had 300,000 people. Now let's think about that versus the 6.6 million people we have in Metro Atlanta today. In the 1920s and 30s, more than 40% of Atlanta's white and black women worked for wages. There's sort of a myth that women didn't work outside the home, and that's a big fat lie. So anyway, let's clear that up. Anyway, most were employed as teachers, nurses, domestics, and factory workers, but increasing numbers of women were entering traditional male fields at the time, such as journalism, business, and oh yes, my niche thing, landscape architecture. Most women joining these traditional fields were, of course, white and of money, which afforded them the opportunity to pursue their interest and showcase their talents. So I'm going to talk about 4 women briefly this evening. This is Claremont Lee, and she was born in Savannah in 1914. Her father was a physician, and her mother, huge surprise, was an avid gardener. After schooling in Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston, South Carolina, she earned her undergraduate degree in landscape architecture from Smith College in Massachusetts in 1936. And then she went on to get her Master of Landscape Architecture degree from that college graduate school in 1939. She returned to Savannah that same year and worked as a landscape architect for the Sea Island Company, overseeing landscape designs for federal housing projects because the federal government was one of the only places that was employing women at this time. Again, huge shock. And here we see Claremont pictured at her working desk in 1969. And sidebar, I actually knew Claremont. And she was a wonderful person. She was, when I was in graduate school at Georgia State, my professor sent me to meet her with the warning of, she's kind of a curmudgeon, and she's probably not gonna like you at all. Boy, was he wrong. She liked me lots. So Claremont Lee had an interest in historic gardens, and in the 1940s, she began to draw plans for different historic sites in the South, including this plantation on the Altamaha River near Brunswick, Georgia. And she was really interested in doing period research, so she looked at old photographs and records and then tried to recreate the gardens of that time. And this is one of her most important projects. The National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Georgia. Are y'all ready to say that again? The National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Georgia, say it quickly, acquired the Andrew Lowe House and made it its state headquarters in 1928, and that's pictured here. And a major goal for the colonial dames was to restore the front garden with, quote, suitable flowers and shrubs. So, of course, who did they hire? They hired Claremont in 1946, and she prepared a plan and tried to bring it back to life from the earlier period. So sidebar, this photograph was taken by my book photographer, and the only way we could actually get that photograph was for him to lean out the second-story bathroom window and me hold his legs. Welcome to history work. This is how crazy we are. So the Lowe House opened to the public as a museum in 1952. Has anybody ever been there? Yeah. If you next trip on Savannah, please go because you have to play a little homage to Claremont when you go. So in anticipation of it being open to the public, Claremont began to prepare construction plans for this rear part of the garden. And she's really credited, of course, with the design, and this was a way to welcome the public and to host parties, which we all need to have when we're fundraising for historic sites, or Atlanta Freedom Bands, of course. You need a place to have a party. In the early 1950s, Lee continued her involvement with historic gardens, becoming an authority on historic period landscapes in Georgia, and she always did great research and was really in-depth in her documentation. And she did important projects. If you know Savannah well, you'll know the Owens Thomas House, the Green Meldrum House, and of course the Julliard Gordon Lowe birthplace. And for those of you who don't remember, she founded the Girl Scouts of the USA in 1912. How many former Girl Scouts? Any girl? Yep, here we all are. I still have my sash with all the badges. I can't at home. I just like sashes, apparently. So here is a photograph of the Claremont Lee designed parterre garden. So a parterre garden, for those of you who don't get into the geekiness of landscape architecture, that just means a pattern or a design garden based on a pattern, like a circle, square, etc. And this is the one she did for the Julliard Gordon Low birthplace in 1960, 7 years after it was designed. This was taken. It's pretty impressive. I'd like to look out my window and see that over in Oakhurst, but no such luck. And here's a more recent image from 2011. So this is what happened to the garden in 2020. And the reason I'm bringing in some of these points is because it kind of is a reminder of how fragile history is, all our history, and why it's so important, for example, that Atlanta Freedom Bands has their records at the Keenan Research Center, so they're preserved in perpetuity, and when we're all long gone, they'll still be there telling these important stories. So in this case, many of us came together, and I won't list all of us, all the organizations and people, including myself, who stood on our heads to try to avoid this happening, and yet it's gone. And it was really upsetting to me from the perspective of, it's the Girl Scouts headquarters, and here's a famous woman landscape architect who was an early leader in the state, and what a terrible example to demolish the work of an early woman in this field and not teach that lesson to the Girl Scouts that come there. From 1951 to 1972, Claremont Lee did something also very important. She worked with Mills B. Lane and Ann Lane down in Savannah to save the historic squares. So in that time period, around 1951, the squares had really been neglected and they looked awful. It's not the Savannah squares we know now. And so she was hired by the Lanes to bring them back to life, and she really helped bring tourism back to Savannah through this work, which was really important. Her designs to preserve the sanctity of the Savannah squares actually brought her into a huge battle with the city officials in Savannah, and this will blow your mind, y'all. I mean, it did me when I read this and when she told me this. So at the time, the city officials wanted to put fire lanes, like emergency lanes, and cut through the center of a lot of the squares. Now, y'all, it's the Savannah squares. They date to 1733, right? So Claremont, along with other mostly female women advocates, got together and prevented this from happening. And she just went to a city council meeting. Does this sound familiar? These kind of things we go through all the time. She went to a city council meeting and she said, well, why can't we just round the corners of the edges of the squares and then the emergency vehicles can have a good turning radius and we don't have to cut through the middle of them and destroy the historic squares? And they go, oh, well, that's a good idea. I roll. Anyway, so she saved them, and we're lucky for that because we all love Savannah. Claremont Lee also worked for recognition in her profession, and she joined the American Society of Landscape Architects in 1950, and she worked with others in Georgia to establish the Georgia State Board of Landscape Architects so we could have registered trained professionals in our state. And she was the fourth landscape architect to be registered in the state of Georgia and the first woman landscape architect to be registered in our states. So that's pretty impressive. She served on many boards: Historic Savannah Foundation, Savannah Public Library, Savannah Science Museum. She was an early founder of the Georgia Conservancy as well. So she really was quite a remarkable person. She passed in 2006 at the wonderful age of 92, and she was inducted into the Georgia Women's Hall of Fame in 2017, and I helped write the nomination for that. So we really admire her, and if you want to know more about her, all her papers and photographs and drawings are at the Georgia Historical Society. So if you want to come geek out down there with me sometime, I usually do that about once a year. So here's the next one we're going to talk about. This is Constance Draper, who worked in the field of landscape design and architecture in Georgia in 1930s and 40s, and here she is pictured with her husband Jesse at a New Year's Eve party in 1915, and there is nothing about that outfit I do not love. And I would like to be wearing it right now, quite honestly, because I just love it. So here's a little backstory on Constance. She was born in Atlanta in 1886, And her father was a well-off and head of an insurance company, and he was the first president of the Piedmont Driving Club over there at Piedmont Park. And after she graduated from high school, of course at a hoity-toity private school in New York, she completed her education at art schools in Paris. Now, why didn't I have these parents? Didn't happen. In November 1915, she married Jesse Draper, who we see in the previous picture, and there they are. The early decades of the 20th century saw a renaissance in gardening in the southeast region of the U.S. and all over the nation. And this was really because there was a growing middle class and suburbs were starting to be developed in all cities around the U.S., and including Atlanta. So, of course, we know some of our earliest suburbs were Inman Park, and then, we go out to Druid Hills, and then up to Buckhead, et cetera. And I won't name all of the neighborhoods, of course, but they were part of that first wave of people who built houses in Buckhead area. And in 1922, they commissioned the prominent architect Neil Reed to design their home at 3 Cherokee Road in Peachtree Heights. And this is right around the corner from the Atlanta History Center. So with an avid interest in art and horticulture and garden design, she designed and executed the garden at her home. And she kept a journal, which is at the Cherokee Garden Library, and it shows everything she did on every day in the year 1923. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. And I've actually read it many times and love her beauty and what she loved and put in her garden. And you can see a picture of her garden there. So Georgia really played a vital role in the garden club movement, and y'all probably don't know that because that's also pretty obscure, but the first garden club in the whole United States was actually founded in Athens, Georgia. And so when I go and give talks in New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, what do you think I say at the beginning of every talk? Yeah, I sure do. So Ladies Garden Club in Athens in 1891. And then other garden clubs came along with the suburbanization, and Draper was the founding member of Peachtree Garden Club, which is the oldest garden club in Atlanta, which is 1923. And unlike Claremont Lee and Edith Henderson, who I'll speak about in a little while, she did not study landscape architecture in college, nor become officially a landscape architect. She was really a landscape designer, but she got her knowledge through self-study and also courses that the Garden Club of Georgia made available to women at that time to study landscape design. And so she started designing for her friends and family, and then she started being paid for it because she was really good at it. And she was a real powerhouse in her own right, and she wrote for the Atlanta, at that time, the Atlanta Journal or the Atlanta Constitution. They were two separate papers. And she also became quite well known in New York because she was a leading flower show judge, and she just kind of made her own path. And due to her passion for historic gardens, she served as a book committee member on this important work from 1933 called Garden History of Georgia. And my book, Seeking Eden, my second book, is actually based on research from this book. So if you're into gardening, I can tell you about that after this talk. So Draper partnered with landscape architect Edith Henderson, who later became Edith Henderson, and she worked on projects for like the Callaway family. This predates Callaway Gardens, and she worked on their private homes in LaGrange area. And she also wrote lots of garden publications, and she gave talks all over the Southeast, and she was quite well known for it. And she also helped document Hills and Dales Estate down in LaGrange, Georgia. Now, how many folks have been down there to enjoy that gorgeous place? Okay, summer road trip. It looks just like this now. It's absolutely breathtaking. In 1945, Draper spearheaded the effort of her club to establish the Neil Reed Memorial Scholarship Fund in Landscape Architecture at the University of Georgia. And this scholarship, which was established in 1947 officially, still helps students today. And I'm happy to say that the last several recipients have been women of that scholarship. In 1971, Jessie endowed a professorial chair of landscape architecture at UGA in her honor. Now that's a good partner. We like that. And she passed in 1976 at the wonderful age of 90, and her collection is also held at the Cherokee Garden Library. Again, still would like to wear that outfit. Our third woman we're talking about this evening is Helen Hawkins Clark. She was actually born in Americus, Georgia in 1892, and in the late 1890s, her father business brought her to Atlanta with her family. And she was quite an interesting person. She kind of marched to her own drummer for that time period, and she was very active in Junior League of Atlanta, and she was founding member of Cherokee Garden Club. But she was also very apparently opinionated, outspoken, and ruffled lots of feathers everywhere she went, so I like her. I also really want to know what color of red lipstick she's wearing in this picture. Is it just me? Could this please be in color? Because I want that color. I really do. I just love that image. So 11 white-only garden clubs, including the Cherokee Garden Club of Atlanta, established the statewide organization, the Garden Club of Georgia, in 1928. Yes, this is during the Jim Crow South, so we have to put it in context. Over the next decade, the Garden Club of Georgia grew rapidly, recording over 4,000 women on their rolls in 1936. And as a member of Cherokee Garden Club, Clark was involved with many community service projects, but the one that speaks most to me is the Dolly Blaylock Blake Memorial Garden at the Henrietta Eggleston Hospital for Children. So they actually hired a landscape architect to design a garden where children could be taken out when they were ill with their families and have peace and respite when they were suffering. And if you all don't know, the Eggleston Children's Hospital moved. It's not this location now, but it's still here. It's on Emory's campus. And another garden was designed there for families and children to get respite and solace when they're suffering. And that garden was designed by my mentor, Edward Dordery. He was now 94. So this has a long tradition in Atlanta. So Clark became a prize-winning flower ranger, and how I know this is I found 47 articles in the Atlanta Journal talking about her flower awards. Yeah, that's what we do. And she was also a flower show judge, but she was also an artist, and she loved to sketch. And luckily, her daughter Helen left these wonderful sketches to the Garden Library, so we have about a dozen of them, and it really does show her sense of scale and artistry and how she brought that to her work. And in 1929, she and her husband, Arthur, bought a house on West Andrews Drive, and she designed their garden throughout the 1930s and 40s, and it was a wildly popular place to be on garden tours. And the Atlanta Journal did an article in 1938. You can see how over the top it is. I love it. And it describes the garden, which is no longer extant, unfortunately. And it says, "The beauty of the native forest trees makes an effective background for all the masses of flowers, columbines, foxgloves, hollyhocks, and bee balm. It is a place of pleasure." So I wish I could go back in time and walk in that garden, but. So garden clubs provided some women like Helen Clark the vehicle to work in professions like landscape architecture. And so interestingly, she did something that would probably appall almost every young person ever. Her daughter graduated from high school and enrolled at age 18 at the University of Georgia, and what did Mom Helen do? She enrolled when she was 43, the same year her daughter was a first year at University of Georgia to get a degree in landscape architecture. I love that. I think that's brilliant. So good for her. So she studied there, and she also became horticultural chairman for Garden Club of Georgia, and you can see her pictured here with Hubert Von Owens, who was the head of the landscape architecture program and later dean of that program. So like most other women practicing in this field in the first half of the 20th century, she primarily was hired to do private homes, residential gardens, because of course women weren't considered competent enough to do a corporate space or, a big public park. Right, okay. But that was the mindset. And she worked for an all-male firm except her called Newberry and Johnson in Atlanta all through the 1930s. So she was definitely breaking ground in that way. And she was also really, again, for this time period, it doesn't feel this way for where we are now in the 21st century, but she was stepping outside the box. She was in school with a young man named Perry Hunt Wheeler, and in 1938, after they got out of college, they developed a partnership together, and they were designing together all over Georgia, which was really quite unusual for the time. And then, of course, World War II broke out in 1941, and their practice had to stop. And then near the end of the war, there's a letter where they're talking about opening another business, but it never happened. But the only reason I bring that up is you all know this. This is the White House Rose Garden before someone ruined it. Don't get me started. We'll be here all night. Just that one point. I could talk up here for an hour, but I won't. So anyway, Perry Hunt Wheeler designed this original rose garden with Bunny Mellon during the Kennedy administration. So sadly, this garden no longer exists. Thank you, Trumps. Leave that alone. Okay. I know, bless her heart. It's terrible. So Helen sadly contracted polio in the late 1940s, which sort of slowed down her practice as a landscape architect, but she still struggled on and was well enough to just do projects and designs and gardens for close family and friends. And here you see a garden she designed. This is on 15th Street in Midtown, and it dates from the late 1950s. And I actually met the descendants, and they gave me this photograph just to get a sense of the type of garden she designed. So back to, please somebody find out the color of that red lipstick. So she passed in 1974 here in Atlanta at 82, and her collection is, of course, at the Garden Library over at the Keenan Research Center. So the last woman we're going to talk about this evening is someone I knew very well and adored, and I love closing with my talk on her. This is Edith Harrison Henderson, and yes, she is standing right at 5 foot even. 5 foot, 0 inches, no nothing, right? And you see this picture of her? She is fierce. She was fierce. She was amazing. And this picture really embodies Edith in the most perfect way. So she was actually born in 1911 in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her family moved here to Atlanta in 1925 when her father was transferred by the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, way before there was Verizon and all these other things. So after graduating from North Avenue Presbyterian School, she received a diploma in 1934 from the well-known Lothrop School of Landscape Architecture in Massachusetts. And this was a school that was founded in 1901 to train women in the profession of landscape architecture. And so it's very important. Edith Henderson was one of the first registered women landscape architects in Georgia and in the Southeast. And she was actually licensed to practice in 6 states, which was very unusual, actually, at this period. And she had reciprocity in other states because she was really well known in her field. Her masterly sense of balance, proportion, and space is the signature of her work, and her designs were refined, classical, and very elegant as well, much like Edith. So here's a drawing that she did in 1934, a pencil sketch, which we have in the collection, which gives you a sense of her elegance and her quality of her design. And okay, just to geek out a little further, see all the beautiful Louisiana iris she has on the pathways. Yeah, plant geek, love it. Anyway. So she is also a big part of the city's history. When she returned to Atlanta after she got her degree, she was appointed the new director of the garden center that had just been established where? At Rich's department store downtown. Now, I know y'all don't know this, but my first Christmas job in Atlanta, Georgia was wrapping Christmas presents at the Rich's department store in downtown. I'm not going to tell you my age because you're not going to believe me. But anyway, hope you don't believe me. So I'm like, yes, I've been there. So this garden center was really a hub for garden club activity, and she was really a great director, bringing people interested in gardening from all over the Southeast would come to Rich's to this garden center to study gardens. They had classes, and you could learn all about bonsai or indoor houseplants or what perennials to put in your garden, and it was a really big thing. So as you all know, there's a big new push towards gardening in recent years, and she was doing that, except this was in 1936. And so she also had private clients all over the city, and her practice was booming. And so she actually had to give up her directorship at Rich's because her practice was so huge, which was quite interesting. She had only been here 2 years back with her degree. So she is the fourth from the left in the first row wearing the fur on her shoulders. Do you all see her? So she was also, of course, part of this national movement of suburbanization and garden clubs, and she was very involved in her garden club, Peachtree Garden Club, oversaw all their publications, and according to fellow members that knew her, and I believe it because I knew her too, she would redline the publication in draft form like 40 times before she'd let it go to print, because she was that kind of lady. She wasn't going to have it. She wanted it perfect. So she was also interesting in many other ways. In 1936, she had a firm with another woman, Grace Campbell, and they began many beautification projects in and around Atlanta, and that was quite interesting at that time. And then in 1939, the architectural firm of Hintz, Adler, and Schutze hired Edith and Grace to develop a landscape architecture plan for Clark Howell homes. And this is the first public housing project to be completed by the Atlanta Housing Authority. And Edith was the main on that project for landscape architecture. And so this drawing, which Edith did and Grace assisted with, shows where the green spaces were going to be and the community spaces. And this was actually in the basement of her home. And I was over after she passed away with her husband, who I referred to fondly as Mr. Jimmy. And I said, Mr. Jimmy, may we have this for the collection? And he says, yes, you may, but I don't think you can lift it, because it was framed. I said, I will lift it. And I got it back to work. So built during the Jim Crow era, Clark Homes was reserved for whites only until 1968, with an all-black counterpart at University Homes Project, which was built in 1938 and located near the Atlanta University Center. And the construction of these housing projects were really important, obviously, for the city, but also, like I mentioned earlier, it gave women landscape architects, professionals, and landscape architects a job, because nobody was hiring them other than the federal government, except private clients that they knew, usually through family. So here is Edith with Mr. Jimmy at First Presbyterian Church right here in Atlanta, right by the High Museum of Art on June 1st, 1939. They had 3 children, Ross, Edward, and Gray, and sadly their little girl, Gray, died in infancy. And in the early 1940s, she was doing something else groundbreaking. She started writing a daily column for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution on gardening, giving people advice. And she did it forever. And she was just basically, what I really like about it is she was just giving practical advice for everyday people like me. Like, I live in an old house that doesn't have a garage. What do you plant to hide your garbage cans and your recycling? Well, they wouldn't have recycling bins, but how do you deal with just basic things? And so it was basically free advice for anybody who picked up the newspaper on how to put a beautiful vine on your mailbox, how to hide your garbage can so your neighbors don't get annoyed with you, all these really practical things. And it was a way that people could just learn about gardening through the newspaper. And in 1993, getting towards the end of her life, she published her book, Edith Henderson's Home Landscape Companion. And you all can still buy this. And I'm going to say buy it through bookshop.org. Please don't buy it through Amazon, because we can have that conversation after the concert as well. Anyway, this is a wonderful book. It's organized by season. If you're interested in gardening in Atlanta, it will walk you through it step by step, and it's really practical, and I really, really value it. It's very practical now. She was also a well-known speaker, and she spoke all over the U.S., basically from the late 1940s until the early 1990s when her health started declining. So during her 5-decade career, her son and I have tried to make a list, and we've come up with over 10,000 gardens she designed throughout the Southeast region during her lifetime. And we don't have them all. But that's where we stopped. And of course, she primarily did residential design, and this was also very brilliant on her part. She had 2 children, and she had her husband as well. And so instead of participating in a firm, she opened her own company. And what she would do was very practical. Say, for example, if Cliff hired her, she would go over to Cliff's house. She would walk the property with Cliff, and then she would sit at his kitchen table with a little notebook like this, and she would design his garden sitting at his kitchen table. And she would hand him the notebook with the plant list in the back, who to call to install the garden. He would hand her a check. Cliff would get the notebook, and then she would go pick up her kids from school. And she just created her own way of doing business, which worked, and she was extremely successful. So I'm just going to show you a couple of things she designed just to give you a sense of the quality of her work. This garden is no longer extant. It was quite beautiful. This garden is still there. This is the Martin Garden. And although her focus was primarily on residential design, she also did institutional and commercial projects, and she did projects for big companies in Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, all over. One of my favorite places she designed was the old Edwards Bakery and Pie Company in Decatur, Georgia, which is no longer there, and apparently they loved her so much that they put pies in the back of her car. This is the kind of thing you find out when you research people. And anyway, great fun. And then in the 1970s, the city of Atlanta actually hired her to be a consultant for MARTA to design the landscaped areas around the city's MARTA system. So that was one of her big main projects and contributions to our city. And this is actually my favorite garden she ever designed. She did the outdoor sanctuaries at First Pres, of which she was a member in 1929, and this is the Memory Garden. And you can't see it in this picture, but it's actually, this blue stone is in the shape of an angel. And this is a place of reflection and, of course, to honor those who have passed. And it's really a beautiful garden. It's an all green and white garden, and it's a really nice sanctuary space. And it had fallen into disrepair in the late 90s and early 2000s, but in 2014, a company was hired to restore it. And they actually completed the project and cut the ribbon on Edith's birthday, June 8th, 2014, but June 8th. So some other places that you'll know in Atlanta that Edith was seminal in helping with, she was a founding member of the Atlanta Botanical Garden. There would be no Atlanta Botanical Garden. She was a big leader there. She also did a lot of the gardens and grounds at the Atlanta History Center, and she was just an impassioned civic advocate. She worked on the Atlanta Urban Design Commission. She was involved with a lot of the saving of various parks around the city. And this predates, of course, organizations like Trees Atlanta, Park Pride, et cetera. So there she is again, looking amazing with her clipboard. So she was also a really big advocate for her profession and getting women in her profession. And she was a very visible leader. She was elected Woman of the Year for Atlanta Professionals in 1964. In 1968, she was installed as a Fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, which is their highest ranking you can get. And she later served as the chair of the Board of Fellows. And in 1976, she became the first woman in the history of the American Society of Landscape Architects nationally to be elected as an officer of that organization. She became vice president. She won lots of awards, which we won't name here, but lots and lots and lots of awards, especially many awards from the city of Atlanta. And her papers, of course, are held over at the Keenan Research Center at the Cherokee Garden Library. And I just wanted to close on a couple of comments. As we continue to explore the records and documents in the Keenan, particularly the Garden Library, and we keep building relationships with community groups, I will continue documenting stories of many, many more women and people in Georgia who worked in the past, and also people who are practicing today. And their stories, just like every story of every person in this room, is significant to the understanding of our state's diverse history. And we all should be documented, shared, and valued. And that's so important. And I want to conclude with 2 points. You know, I love quotes if they're good. And this is one great quote that Edith gave. When space is a scarce commodity, the thoughtful use of it is like a breath of fresh air. We need it badly in cities, in small towns, and in our own backyards. Uncluttered space is this priceless possession that will not be with us long unless we protect it. And she wrote that pre the environmental movement, okay? So, you know, think about how she's thinking about space and how it matters to us. So that's the end of my talk, but I do want to invite you all to come see me at the Keenan Research Center. Come see the Atlanta Freedom Band's records. If you don't have anything on your ticket for tomorrow for Father's Day and you want to come celebrate Juneteenth, I'll be on campus all day. We have a huge jubilee going on over at the Atlanta History Center all day tomorrow, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for coming and letting me geek out on my favorite subject.
Well, thank you so much for that. It certainly has set the tone for our evening tonight, where we're celebrating women in all fields of endeavor. So we'll take a break for a little bit before the concert begins at 8. So enjoy some free time while the band gets set up. Greetings, everyone. I'm Cliff Norris, Director of Marketing and Development for Atlanta Freedom Bands. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Hear Us Roar, AFB's celebration of women composers. We are so happy that you've joined us for this exciting program that closes our 29th performance season. This concert was originally planned for June 2020 as a celebration of the centennial of women's suffrage that year, but we all know what happened in 2020. And then happened again in 2021. So we are thrilled to finally have the chance to present this great music to you. Only an estimated 13% of composers are women. We highlight and celebrate that 13% with this concert. All but one of our pieces tonight were composed by women, and we are so proud to be able to share the talents of these composers and their amazing music that they have gifted us with you. Before we begin, we want to offer a few words of thanks. First, we want to thank St. Paul United Methodist Church in Grant Park for providing our rehearsal home. We also want to thank the church at Ponson Highland for providing tonight's concert venue. We also thank our local arts agencies. This program is supported in part by the Atlanta Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs. Funding for this program is also provided by the Fulton County Board of Commissioners under the guidance of the Fulton County Arts Council. This program is supported in part by the Georgia Council for the Arts through the appropriations of the Georgia General Assembly. The Georgia Council for the Arts also receives support from its partner agency, the National Endowment for the Arts, and we're happy to put your tax dollars to work. We want to thank our donors who have sustained AFB during the pandemic. We didn't know what season 29 would look like when we started rehearsals last October. A number of generous people provided us the resources to present great performances in the concert hall and community this year. Your gifts have meant so much to all of our AFB family. So let's have a round of applause for all of our donors. In the concert program listing, we accidentally omitted one of our players, Brandon Bowers, in the French horn section, so apologies. We have a special way that you can support AFB tonight. Thanks to our wonderful Candace Miller, another troublemaker from the French horn section. We have 3 baskets of gifts filled with wonderful items that we are selling through a silent auction. For those who are going to the beach, there's the vacation basket. For those who may be staying home this summer, there's the staycation basket. And then we have total tailgates. Ooh, looking forward to great events coming up this year. So it's a silent auction, so you've got a chance all the way now through the end of intermission to place your bids, and the funding supports the band. Let's see. Kalia House is a native Atlantan, graduate of Georgia State University with a Bachelor of Music Therapy degree. She's a vocalist, musician, and actress. As a pediatric music therapist, she works with her patients and clients at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. In the community, she performs classical music, musical theater, jazz standards, soul, and even funk. We are so happy to have her join us tonight as our guide and storyteller. So please join me in welcoming our host tonight, Kalia House.
Thank you so much, Cliff, for that beautiful introduction. I am thrilled to be here tonight. On July 19th through the 20th, 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was the first women's rights convention in American history. Considered the birthplace of feminism in the U.S., leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott wrote the Declaration of Sentiments. Modeled after the Declaration of Independence, the document states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal," challenging the ideas of a male-dominated society. Stanton then discussed women's lack of participation in the government, including not having the right to vote, lack of property rights, and the inequality of education and employment. The Declaration insists that women be treated as full citizens of the United States and all the rights and privileges therein. The resolution was signed by 68 women and 32 men. The women and men at the Seneca Falls Convention began breaking down barriers for women in the United States. The female composers we are featuring during our concert today are breaking down barriers for future female composers and musicians as well. For our first piece, honoring women composers, we present Allegra by Tanya Leon. Please welcome Dr. Kathleen Nicole Fallon to the podium.
I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. I'm going to talk just a minute about Virginia Allen, our next composer, featured composer. Lieutenant Colonel Virginia Allen served in the United States Army for 20 years, something very familiar to me. I did the same. She was the first woman to command and conduct an active duty military band. She led the movement to create an inclusive military band for both men and women. She later became the first female conductor of the West Point Band. Since retiring from the military, Lieutenant Colonel Allen has served as a professor of music at many esteemed institutions, to include her current position at the Julliard School. She has composed an extensive library of works over her decades-long career. I met her once. I knew her father, who was Colonel Allen, also a former commander of the Army Band in Washington, D.C. In an interview in March 2021, she tells young girls and women to not let the word no be a boundary to opportunities. Women, and this is her speaking, women can do and be anything that they want to be. I never looked to be the first woman to do anything. I just followed my passions and pursued opportunities that challenged and rewarded me, like serving with the magnificent musicians in the West Point Band. Now, let's enjoy Lieutenant Colonel Virginia Allen's Women on the Podium March.
Ella Baker is a civil rights leader and activist who worked with such people as W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, and Martin Luther King Jr. She believed in the direct participation of citizens in a democracy and led numerous grassroots campaigns to try and involve all members of society in the fight for change. She was a leader in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference alongside Martin Luther King Jr. She worked closely with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and one of its founders, John Lewis. She helped plan the Freedom Rides to protest interstate bus segregation and helped form the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. However, she is most well known as a mentor who stood out to the side and helped future leaders grow, teaching them about her beliefs of the importance of citizen participation in democracy. In honor of all leaders and activists who have and will continue to help create a better world, we present Testimonium by Ann McGinty. Let's welcome Associate Director Kurt Wackerly to the podium. On June 12, 2016, a gunman entered Pulse, an LGBTQ+ nightclub in Orlando, Florida. 49 people lost their lives that day. 49 souls who no longer walk this world. It was a targeted attack in the place where many members of the LGBTQ+ community feel safe and comfortable enough to be their true selves. It was an act of hatred against our community, and it impacted all of us in different ways. We hold these 49 souls close in our hearts, praying for the day where there will be no more hate, and yet also knowing that day may never come. The Pulse Massacre was the deadliest single gunman mass shooting in the United States, a record that has sadly been surpassed. As we remember Pulse this week, we also remember Uvalde, Buffalo, and Philadelphia. We recall events in our own city, as well as Sandy Hook, Aurora, Columbine, Charleston, and many, many more. Our next piece is My Soul to Keep by Julie Giro. Moved by the outpouring of grief around the world in response to Pulse, she created this work to honor the 49 victims of the Pulse Massacre and to all affected by gun violence everywhere. We invite you to join in the singing of the final chorus along using the music printed in your program. Jane Goodall is the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees. She led a 60-year study noting their human-like behaviors. She is the only person to be accepted into chimp society due to her hands-on approach to research, which helped her create deep bonds with the animals she studied. She started the Jane Goodall Institute to support her research and further the cause for conservation of the environment. She is an outspoken environmental advocate, traveling worldwide to highlight the effects of climate change and deforestation on the planet. She has collaborated with groups such as the United Nations, NASA, the World Economic Forum, and the European Union to push for change to protect the environment. She was declared a Dame of the British Empire, appointed the United Nations Messenger of Peace, and been giving awards to numerous to name. Given that she is famed for her work with chimpanzees, she claims that her favorite animal is a dog. So we wonder, does she like cats too? Our next piece is Cat Tango by Jody Blackshaw. We dedicate this piece to all the women who work in sciences, whether it be like Jane in Africa or the mother of AFB baritone Hannah, who works for the CDC.
I don't recall anything being said about these four gentlemen. I know that's in the program notes, but this has been a special treat for us to work with these four gentlemen. And I think you're in for just an amazing, amazing, amazing treat right now. So let's welcome these four gentlemen.
To the second half of Hear Us Roar. So before Kalia continues, we want to announce our gift basket auction winners. Well, we'll wait a moment because we don't want to turn down extra money while people are bidding. So I won't make you suffer through a bunch of my terrible puns while we wait for this moment.
Oh my gosh, hurry up! Thank you.
It's kind of like the hydrogen atom that goes to the bar and order the drink, and the bartender says, the hydrogen atom says, "I think I've lost my electron." And the bartender says, "Are you sure?" And the hydrogen atom says, "Yes, I'm positive." Oh, all right. That's what a Georgia Tech education will buy you. Okay, so now it's time to announce our auction winners. Oh no, our timpanists are gone. So you have to imagine there's a big timpani roll happening right now. For the total tailgates auction, we have Jean Pesavento. For the summer staycation auction, we have Charlene and Kelly in the band. And for the summer vacation gift basket, we have John Tumoras. Yay! So thank you so much for that. You can see me after the program and we'll take care of that. Inside the front cover of your program, you'll find a QR code, something that really has taken on a new life since 2020. With one quick scan on your phone, you'll see tonight's menu with links to join our email list, make a donation, buy tickets, and take our audience survey. Please take a moment after the show to let us know about your experience tonight. The information is very helpful to us as we apply for funding for future performances. So now I'll turn the show back over to our host, Kalia House.
Harvard professor Laurel Thatcher Ulrich writes, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." Our next composer is an example of that. Elizabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre was a child prodigy who impressed even King Louis XIV of France. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, she had an active career as a published music composer and performer, something that was simply unheard of in her time. Truly groundbreaking, she was the first woman in France to have her opera performed. We honor not-so-well-behaved women who have made history with this arrangement of La Flammade, including Adela Hunt Logan. Born in Sparta, Georgia, in 1863, she became a professor at the Tuskegee Institute. In 1895, she traveled to Atlanta to attend the American Women's Suffrage Association convention, the first time the convention was held in the South. However, the convention turned away people of color. With the encouragement of Susan B. Anthony, Logan joined the organization anyway to campaign for the right to vote and educational opportunities for women of color. We now present La Flammade, arranged by AFB's Alexandria Jones. The small ensemble players are Ann Cooley and Small Smalley on clarinet, Alexandria Jones on flute, Amy Toole and Brandon Bowers on French horn, and Mike Blakeney on string bass. Zetian is recognized as one of the most influential leaders in Chinese history. She ruled China for 40 years during the Tang Dynasty, first through her husband, then sons, and finally under her own name for the last 15 years. Under her leadership, the Chinese Empire became one of the most powerful nations in the world. China expanded beyond its historical borders, including rule of Japan and Korea. Government officials were chosen not by class, but by ability. She oversaw the growth of the economy by investing in agriculture and irrigation technology, lowering taxes, and increasing trade between China, Central Asia, and the West. She led the expansion of the Buddhist religion, promoted art and literature, and paved the way for women's participation in politics. She was an incredibly popular ruler amongst the common people and is still honored by an agricultural festival on her birthday. Tonight, we honor Wu Zetian and other influential Chinese women with our performance of Spring Festival by Chen Yi. Please welcome AFB's Associate Director, Kurt Wackerly, to the podium for Spring Festival. Beginning with the Seneca Falls Convention, in 1848, the movement for women's suffrage lasted until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Suffragette leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony argued that women deserved the right to vote because they could help create a more virtuous government. On November 2nd, 1920, 8 million women voted for the first time in American history, changing the government and the United States forever. We dedicate this next song to the suffragettes, our remarkable foremothers, who have paved the way for women's equality in society. Atlanta Freedom Bands is proud to present 5 years of its student composer residency program. For half a decade, we have invited a student composer to provide a work for each of our concert cycles, even the virtual ones. We hope that you have enjoyed experiencing the best of tomorrow's composers today. Tonight, we feature the music of Louis Josephson, a music composition student at the Julliard School in New York. We ask that you pardon us for a moment for departing from our concert theme. Louis provided us this work in 2020, and we want to present it while he is still a student. In an interview with AFB, Louis mentioned that he is a big fan of valedictory pieces that mark different periods of his life. In this piece, he recalls his time as a high school musician with music that expresses the joy and excitement of growing up. If you think the piece sounds a bit like a Broadway overture, you're on the right track. Louis's new musical, Relapse, the Musical, is premiering in New York tonight. It's amazing. Let's welcome AFB Music Director, Dr. Kathleen Nicole Fallon, to the podium for a childhood revelation. Kishida Toshiko was a women's rights activist and known as Japan's first women orator. She toured Japan in 1882, speaking about the creation of a new Japanese society with women as full participants. In her famous speech, Daughters in Boxes, Toshiko outlines the limits placed on Japanese women through the Confucian family system without blaming individual families, but the Japanese culture as a whole. She championed the importance of education for all women and female involvement in the government as a cornerstone for creating a new and better society. She argued that with proper education, women could be as successful as men in leadership positions. She highlighted the strength of Japanese women and her belief in their ability to succeed in every aspect of society. In her words, "If it is true that men are better than women because they are stronger, why aren't our sumo wrestlers in the government?" Good point. We now present Water Reflections by Yukiko Nishimura in tribute to Kishida Toshiko and others who fought for women's rights throughout Japanese history. As our concert draws to a close, everyone in AFB wants to thank you for joining us this evening. In between COVID surges, we have managed to provide our full concert season. We are so happy you have been able to be a part of this season. Thank you again for your support, and don't forget your audience survey. I personally would like to thank Dr. Fallon, Kurt, and Cliff, and of course, the Atlanta Freedom Band for allowing me to be a part of this beautiful experience. Also, shout out to our history teacher, Hannah, who made this amazing script and did all of this history for us. AFB has a lot to look forward to this year and next. We are excited for the return of parades and community events. So look for our marching band and color guard on a street near you. Plus, we are working on exciting plans for our 30th performance season starting this fall. Atlanta Freedom Bands is proud to be your community band. Written by Julia Ward Howe in 1861, the poem, Battle Hymn of the Republic, shares the story of America and its people. Beginning as a war anthem, it has inspired suffragettes, labor organizations, civil rights leaders, and activists from all walks of life. In his final speech, Martin Luther King Jr. famously quoted, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." In 1890, women's rights campaigners were the first to adapt the song to their movement. In their words, "They come from every nation, women fair and brave and strong." Let's close our concert tonight with this stirring music from the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Instead of the Battle Hymn, let's change the name to the Battle Her of the Republic. To honor all the suffragettes and all those who have fought for the rights of women throughout history. Thank you.
still on. Just real quick. It's easy to think that a person like me stands in front of the band most of the time and is the one that does all the work. But nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, I'd like to give Kurt Wackerly another round of applause. Kurt really is a right-hand person, and even though I have big dreams and aspirations and pick a lot of crazy music, Kurt usually brings me back down to the earth and helps me in making good, wise selections. Cliff Norris. All of this background stuff that happens with program notes and the narration and just piecing together things, Cliff is responsible for so much of it, and it just wouldn't happen without Cliff as well. And then Abby in the percussion. You wouldn't know it from the way they play, but if you happen to notice a U-Haul truck out there, that U-Haul truck hauled all of this percussion equipment from a storage unit, which we don't have access to during our regular practices. The percussion section only gets to practice with those instruments on the night before this concert. So they deserve a big round of applause for hauling all of that. And then Cliff did mention the board of directors earlier. Really nothing happens without a board of directors for any nonprofit organization. I'm sure you're aware of that. And they provide the funding and the support for this ensemble as well as 3 others that are part of the Atlanta Freedom Band. The Metronomes, which is a jazz band, which rehearses on Monday nights if you're interested. They do a lot of performing. The marching band is really one of the most visible components of this organization. They are huge, and hand in hand with them is the Color Guard. Those are 4 organizations that are all part of the Freedom Band umbrella. And so let's give all of those organizations a big round of applause. And lastly, let me just say that the leadership in this group is phenomenal, always has been phenomenal, and I feel certain always will be phenomenal. There's a previous national lesbian and gay band board president, Cliff, in this organization. There are numerous current board members of that national organization, and so anyway. I just wanted to recognize all of these people and let you know that really it's a really deep bench and nothing happens without a lot of key players. So thank you.